Hello there. The UK government is charged with the crime of emptying its jails of criminals for the purpose of then filling them with political prisoners instead. So the UK government now stands accused of keeping political prisoners in order to silence them and any movement, however benign, that they may be associated with. And the anecdotal reports coming out about how those arrested at the so-called far-right riots have been treated with no chance of bail and quickly herded through the courts while being advised, and I use that word in a very, very wide sense, they were advised to plead guilty, so the courts could then just rip into even those with previously unblemished records, something which paints a very dark picture of our once venerated justice system. And after the resounding success of his previous documentary, a certain Mr. T is currently compiling a new one about these very cases, a documentary that should prove to be very, informative. Especially given the number of those who ordinary punters would believe to be a direct danger to our young offspring are let loose almost immediately by those same judges with no actual prison time. And the case of the Manchester Airport 3, where it seems that no charges have yet been laid. I hope I'm wrong about that, but if I'm right, then the two-tier stench is overwhelming. If it waddles like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then some would argue it is the politicisation of the UK justice system. And such a system does produce political prisoners. And part of this political prisoner process normally means putting extreme pressure on the prisoner in order to damage them psychologically, physically, or even cause their death. And the anecdotal evidence on who really runs our prisons will lead many people to think that some prisoners are being put under that extreme pressure of this nature. And there are those like the protesters outside Belmarsh Prison who fear for those inmates. Now, I've been sent a copy of an audio file that is circulating social media right now that, if true, would indicate that the authorities are embarking exactly on that course of action. From the police right the way through the process and into our prisons. Right down to the detail of splitting the far-right prisoners apart and isolating them in what I would call hostile prison wings. For a reason one can only guess at. Just remember that the next time the Prime Minister Keir Starmer or his Foreign Secretary David Lammy have a go at a foreign regime for their human rights abuses. Just remember it. I won't play that audio file because I cannot vouch for its provenance, although it sounds pretty damn genuine to me. Now, I cannot see how the prison authorities can keep this sort of behaviour, if that is what is happening, from the families and friends of those inmates, especially if any harm does result from the manner of their incarceration. After all, they can't stop the visits, can they? Although they can exert pressure on the inmates to keep their mouths shut. Now, according to the encyclopediabritannica.com, a political prisoner is a person who is imprisoned because that person's actions or beliefs are contrary to those of his or her government. But this becomes even more sinister when it goes on to explain that, in practice, political prisoners often cannot be distinguished from other types of prisoners. So it comes down to whether a person is being locked up for a crime or whether that crime is being used as an excuse to imprison and silence an opponent with an outlandish sentence. Or more to the point, if the law is being interpreted to ensure that those with majority felt legitimate concerns who put their heads above the parapet are jailed and silenced for long periods of time. Sound familiar? And given the actions of the police and courts in recent times, you can see how easily that can be brought about. And the real question about this is, what protection was provided to these prisoners by the European Convention on Human Rights? Oh, and it's not just the so-called far-right rioters that are getting it in the neck. No, the establishment is now going out of its way to prove its impartiality. It has recently swooped on a few pro-Palestine activists too, so upsetting the anti-Semites. But the proof of the pudding will be in what happens to those people, compared to what's already happened to the far-right inmates. But that aside, this lashing out against the so-called far-right has sent the prison and police cell systems into meltdown, to the point that the Justice Minister of Estonia has offered up its free prison space to the UK government. ERR News, the English language service of Estonian public broadcasting, said, Minister of Justice Liisa Pakosta has submitted a memo to the government cabinet proposing the renting out of vacant cells in Estonia's 3 prisons to selected countries dealing with overcrowding issues. Going on to say the offer had been made to the UK, Sweden and the Netherlands due to their openly stated prison overcrowding issues. And she went on to say that the UK has been among the countries that have shown very active interest in this. So sending people to a foreign country can be a deterrent, can't it? So what better way of separating the politically driven offenders from their support base of family visitors than by sending them to a virtual penal colony? Much to the delight of the extreme woke lefties, of course. And it seems that Tartu prison in Estonia is nearly empty, and a system like this could earn Estonia about €30 million for looking after between 350 and 500 prisoners, which would be much more profitable than selling the prison or mothballing it, and it provides solid ongoing employment for Estonians. Now, the UK also has a clogged court system. How long before some Home Office bright spark comes up with the idea of just shipping people out there for interrogation, trial, sentencing and jail time, all wrapped up into one package? And then there's our woefully undermanned police services. I should not be giving them ideas, should I? Now, political prisoners can only be kept within a system where the police, the prosecuting authority, the courts, including any jury involved, and the detention system are all in political lockstep with an overbearing government. Now, the police and the prosecuting services are, at the end of the day, government employees paid by the taxpayer who are supposedly independent. But they have to follow government rules of procedure, and those can be changed. The courts are also independent, but still, of course, taxpayer funded. And most jurors, if there is a jury, don't understand that they are there to not just assess the accused, but also assess the establishment and its actions. And they do not have to obey any diktat emanating from the judge. If the jury believes something on the side of the state stinks, then they are under a duty to give a verdict that reflects that. Something that's called a perverse verdict, to try and make it seem somehow inferior to a judge-approved verdict. That's why so many of these so-called far-right rioters have been under heavy advice to plead guilty. It gets them straight to the sentencing stage with no bothersome legal arguments and juries. All that has to be done is to apply the correct type of pressure. And this, in some nasty regimes, can take the form of telling the accused to plead guilty, or else their family will be targeted and their children removed by social services. while they sit on remand in complete helplessness. But that would never ever happen in the UK, dear viewer. Would it?